awarding industry veterans, analyzing financial reports, and some awesome new games. All that and more in this week's news for February 8th, 2023. Starting off first, Gamma and the Academy of Adventure Gaming Arts and Design have announced the newest inductees into their Hall of Fame class. First introduced in 1974, the Hall of Fame from the Academy of Adventure Gaming was designed to celebrate, people in game design and the gaming industry. Now, to be eligible, you mostly, apparently some situations, have to be working in the field of gaming or adjacent for at least 20 years. A product, however, needs to only survive the test of time for 10 years. Guessing it's harder for a game to live longer than a designer, but that might be up for debate. Anyway, 3 people are going to be inducted this year, as well as 2 games and 1 special award. First, the 2 designers being introduced into the Hall of Fame, Mark Rosewater and Martin Wallace. Mark Rosewater has been working on Magic the Gathering for quite some time and has also made the poor choice of opening his own blog and answering all the questions from the Magic community, as well as becoming their lightning rod when something goes wrong. Martin Wallace, on the other hand, has designed tons of different games, more in the Euro category, so much so that if you go to his Board Game Geek page to look at notable games, there are tons of games listed for many different years, so there are probably a good chance you've played some of these. But joining the 2 designers is an artist, Jeff Easley. He'll be joining the Hall of Fame for all his work he's done for Dungeons & Dragons and Magic the Gathering in particular. I know one of my old favorite Commander staple cards, Rhymescale Dragon, is one of his pieces, a card of which I try to jam into my decks, which causes me to make a giant Snowland mana base. Now, the games being added are 1829 and Cyberpunk RPG. I haven't played either, but apparently 1829 is the grandfather of all train games, while Cyberpunk RPG, you can probably guess from the name, sort of led to what we know as Cyberpunk 2077. Finally, there is the Rising Star Award. From what I can tell, this is given to someone who isn't being inducted in the Hall of Fame right then, rather someone who maybe shows great promise and probably doesn't hit that 20-year benchmark. This year, it is being awarded to Mathis Wiggy. I'm really sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but this is the game designer of Arc Nova. Very popular. I loved it, so odds are you've tried it, and I'm very excited to see what else they have in store. But that is everything from the nominees right now. Let me know if there's someone who you think hasn't been nominated or a game that hasn't been nominated and should be in the comments down below. Now to talk about financials. First, the fight for crowdfunding continues. Now, we all know Kickstarter, which is really what made backing and crowdfunding huge. But BackerKit and Gamefound, places we used to go to after Kickstarter projects, of course throwing their hat in the ring with having their own crowdfunding pages. Now, BackerKit is still in a beta mode. However, last year we were able to see the reports and finances for both Kickstarter and Gamefound. And while Kickstarter is still king of the hill, Gamefound is closing the gap. Now, they wanted to make about 25% last year of what Kickstarter did, so about $67 million. But unfortunately, they only brought in $28.3 million, but that's still a 45% increase for Gamefound. Kickstarter, on the other hand, did decrease in what they brought in by 12.4%, which is $33 million, but as you can tell, 12 of making 33 means they still have plenty of money. What's interesting, though, is there's not a lack of campaigns from Kickstarter. Apparently, Kickstarter actually increased in the number of successful campaigns. So from what we can tell, more people are making projects, but they are going to Gamefound as well as sticking more into Kickstarter. I also think this price decrease may be because more smaller projects, as maybe we are starting to get tired of those heavy, bloated, miniature, big box games, as it's very hard to get them in. Also really sucks if they don't deliver. Now, we'll have to see what happens, but right now, Kickstarter still is the Goliath, but maybe soon we'll be able to see all 3 of these pages being on equal terms financially. Now for another financial story, a while back, Bank of America listed Hasbro's stock as underperforming because what they saw, they said they and, quote, were ruining their golden goose with Magic the Gathering. Back then, they were saying that there was significant fatigue growing among the fan base because they were printing too much product. And while this, of course, brought in short-term profit, Bank of America feared that they were ruining their future investments. Well, as of last Tuesday, Bank of America reiterated the stance saying, yeah, they're still doing it. They said that not only do they see that in Magic, but with the current debacle that happened with Dungeons and Dragons, it almost showed them killing off one of their biggest property, or at the very least, allowing competitors to significantly grow. Like I said, when it came back with the D&D players, Hasbro has to work in building up the trust, but now not just with its fan base, but with its investors as well. Now, we'll have to see what happens here. Usually, I actually think as fans, we are clashing with investors and what to do versus like what's best for the property versus what's more financially viable. But in this case, it seems our goals are aligned. Make the game accessible, easy for us to stay and not get exhausted by, and one that we can actually afford and play. Of course, we'll have to see what happens here. They did turn back with the Dungeons and Dragons stuff. We'll have to see what happens with Magic the Gathering, and of course, with the movies coming out as well. Regardless, this reiteration from Bank of America is probably not the news Hasbro wanted to hear. Sticking with Hasbro, but I think is a bit more positive news, Renegade Game Studios will now be publishing Hasbro's Aquire. There seems to be a pretty good partnership here. They first got off with a lot of their licenses, the Transformers, My Little Pony, G.I. Joe, but they also got the rights to, games for older audiences. I don't think it's gamey per se, but things like Axis and Allies, Diplomacy, like Hasbro is still going to be making their monopolies and games of that ilk. So it seems to me Hasbro is handing off these games that I feel hobbyists that aren't strictly collectors, because obviously if you're a Monopoly collector, that's a different story. People who might want specific reprints and better quality pieces, and they're giving it off to Renegade Game Studios, a company that, just does games. So that seems to be probably a very good thing. And this, of course, means there's going to be a new reprinting of Aquire. So if you want that or your copy is very busted, now's the chance to pick up a brand new, fresh one. You can, of course, keep an eye on them and see what happens. I am really curious because Avalon Game Studios with Hasbro, I feel like the whole point was they were supposed to make the Meteor games. And I almost feel like Renegade Game Studios now is doing what I thought Avalon would do. So I wonder if that's now going to be what Hasbro does now, just hand everything off to Renegade in terms of this is not the same formula with a different skin kind of thing. And if they're going to keep Avalon Hill alive or just take it apart or even somehow merge it with Renegade. We'll have to wait and see, but fans of Aquire, good news, new edition coming out. Finally, some fun new game announcements that came out over the last 2 weeks. First, we have a new entry in the world of Imperial settlers, this time diving deep into the earth. Imperial miners seems to play into this sort of programming game style where you'll be building an engine, triggering them every time you play a card, triggering all cards above you in the mine. And of course, there'll be different factions, probably relatable cards and characters that we've seen before. And I've liked all the other Imperial games, so I'm sure I'm very excited to try this one out. Though now I'm expecting there in the future to be Imperial Orbit, where we go into space. Stonemaier has two big announcements. First, there was a new entry in the world of the Scythe, so it's the Scytheverse, which is now titled, I believe it's 1920 Expeditions, could be just Expeditions. This is actually a sequel to Scythe, where you'll be exploring outward and conquering rather than the original game where you're all going centered towards that technological hub. Really excited to see what this is. I love the idea, especially these games that have big worlds having sequels, so you sort of see what's going on. Very reminiscent of a lot of open world games I like that do it right, Fallout being my big example. So can't wait to see that, and it will be dropping at Gen Con, but you can pre-order now. The other is an expansion for Tapestry, this one titled Fantasies and Future. It's got a sci-fi theme going on, even though there's some already sci-fi stuff in there. This will not add a new tracker and rules like it did in the previous expansion with the art. In this, it's just going to add more cards to the decks and what you love, so this is probably a good one to pick up earlier because you just shuffle it in with all your other cards. And I'm sure it'll include some balancing notes for some cards as previous Tapestry expansions have. Now, one other thing, but this one makes me really happy and maybe just for a few and me. Last week, I reported on the Digimon card game Rising Wind, which was supposed to be a reprint sent, but the American version was not going to include the reprints. Well, they have reported today they have heard us and they're going to delay the set so they can include the reprints. This 1 week turnaround, for me at least, is very good news, which shows that they are listening, understanding how to fix their mistakes very fast. Hasbro, this is what the Magic and D&D fanbase wants to hear. They want you to listen and change things very quickly because, let's be honest, we will still buy the product, but if you do that, we're going to be very happy to buy the product and share it and get more fans into the fandom. So good on you, Bandai, for listening to your fans. Hey, it's time to return to the world of crowdfunding, but not for a news story because now it's Kickstarter Pickstarter. Let's see what cool projects are in store for this week. We're going to stop by Gamefound first with Sateria. This game is all about gods warring, but not simply just having their followers fight each other, but also prove their best by the weight of their souls that worship them. Weight being the key word here, as the game will revolve around a scale in the center that, depending on the game mode, will have you add or remove meeple of your faction in order to gain victory. The game has different what they call story modes, but from what I can tell, those are game modes and rule sets that change setup and rules. And in addition to these different rule sets, you'll also have factions that are very asymmetrical, some of them only having fewer meeple while some have many smaller ones. This seems very reminiscent of Root, but adding in a lot of the change in rules, so it's not always just a war game maybe. Depending on what rule set you have, the scales can change what spaces are available or not, or maybe just the win condition. Either way, I think it adds enough in there to make it stand out as its own game, and of course, looking very cute and has dragons, so that's an extra bonus point. You can get the base game for this for $57 or the deluxe for around $84. Next, we return to Kickstarter for Cubicle 7's Broken Weave. If you were looking for a post-apocalypse fantasy world similar to Dark Souls, this project is for you. The world has been decimated with a strange new force known as decay eating away at people's memories and possibly twisting them into barely recognizable nightmare forms of their previous selves. You will play as broken heroes in this world, having to balance your own hope along with decay in order to not only maybe carve your place in the world, but just simply survive. You will fight decaying monsters, build up your own home base known as a haven, and gather what little resource you have not only from the planet, but from the monsters you kill as well, in order to fight through the decay. Now, like every RPG, there's a PDF and books and more. The first PDF pledge is around $29, while the first book you can get for $60. The Mad King Ludwig has spawned many games to fulfill his crazy whimsies, but now has decreed he needs a flip and write. Blueprints of Mad King Ludwig seems to play just like the original, but this time instead of placing tiles, you'll be drawing them. Using translucent cards, you will trace the cards over your own blueprint sheet, adding them not just simply in the grid pattern, but you can rotate them in weird ways. This is the castle of Mad King Ludwig. Of course, it can't be just a simple squared castle. So you're going to have some very weird shaped rooms that will go outside the grid. And of course, each room will be their own type and color, meaning you're going to have to break out those color pencils to make a very colorful, strange, but fun layout of a blueprint. You can get the retail version of this for $40 or bump it up to $70 for the deluxe. It comes with tons of stuff, including lots of color pencils and a castle-shaped pencil sharpener. Finally, it is February, which means Zine Quest has returned. These are tons of short RPGs. I highly recommend you take a look at them because since they're small and easy, they're not only cheap, but cover so many different topics. There's probably one for whatever is your fancy. Now, there are tons that you should take a look at, but here are a few that caught my eye. First, there's The Sins of the Eden Prime, which uses the mothership system to tell a story of an AI caretaker, which, if you can guess from the cover image, doesn't go as planned. Golf Quest is a fun light dexterity game to play through a bunch of silly fantastical courses, maybe a good palate cleanser for many of the more darker zines out there. Terminus is a journal writing RPG zine where you actually use a journal and tarot cards to write stories about the world actually around you. And finally, this one, of course, was very easy to catch my eye. Electrocube War Adventures. It uses the same system as another one known as Valor Knights RPG, but it's got really awesome robots. Of course, I'm down to roll out with this one. But with a bunch of new projects, there's also ones ending. Here are 4 that you may want to check out before it's too late. First, we have Two Thin Coats Wave 2, which seems to be all about miniature paints and has done very well, so I assume it's very good. So if you are the kind of person who paints miniatures, you might want to check this one out. Then this one was an interesting one. It's You Ask, I Write Too, and this one is all about getting, whether it's, I think, RPG content, if it's a story or just maybe some messages, whatever you need. It's very open-ended, and having any writer help you write it or maybe just write it themselves. So if anyone needs that extra little bit for their RPG, definitely check this one out. Like I said, it's a bit more open-ended, so it's not simply just a product. So definitely give it a look. It seems almost like a commissioning, but with writing instead of art. Then there is the Aboria game I talked about previously, but just ending very soon. It might end by the time I finish editing this. So run that. Finally, this one is a bit of an odd one, but it of course caught my eye. It is called Horse Girl. And no, it is not about riding horses and winning awards and going to the Derby. It's much darker. If you don't like body horror, this is not one for you. But if you are into movies that tackle that subject and maybe don't want to force your friends to play with you, Human Centipede style, this GM-less RPG will be the one for you. That's all we have this week. Let me know what your thoughts on this are, what projects I missed. Of course, it being Zine Quest month, let me know what zines you're backing. Definitely go check those out. And of course, any of the stories that are interesting. Like I said, anyone who should be inducted in the Hall of Fame, be it a game or a person and designer. I'd love to hear from you in all the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. And of course, thank you for your attention. I know that means a lot. Time and attention are very important right now. So please stay tuned for what else we have in store. And of course, thank you for everyone who likes, shares, subscribes, all the stuff, because the YouTube algorithm likes that. And more so, those on Patreon, all my rollers, you are awesome. But for now, that's the end of the news. I'll see you next week on the News Roundup.